Welcome, bienvenidos, everyone. I'd also like to begin by saying kwe, and by recognizing the long-standing connections of Indigenous peoples to Tiohtià:ke, Muniang, Montréal, in particular Ganagahage people of Ganawage, Ganasatake, and Akwesasne, whose ancestors, along with those of Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Abenaki communities, lived here long before the arrival of settlers. Still today, the island is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. These communities continue to face challenges to their rights and the erosion of their traditional territories as a result of ongoing processes of settler colonialism. If you'd like to learn more about the CCA's commitments to Indigenous communities in and around Tiohtià:ke, Muniang, Montréal, I invite you to look at our Living Land Acknowledgement project. So this is in the blue tab on the CCA website. But one of the most important elements of these commitments is something called the Indigenous Land Restitution Research Creation Fellowship. And we're currently working with Haudenosaunee artist Amanda Lalor on a film called Everlasting that will open on September 25th, if you happen to still be in Montreal, if you're a visitor, or if you live here. And in that film, Amanda examines instances of urban Indigenous presence, continuity, celebration, and for example, urban hide tanning, and other practices that she documents through the film. And it's a really important element on our Living Land Acknowledgement project because it provides direct resources to community members to undertake research practices that they deem important for their own communities, while also interrogating the role CCA plays in the city. The previous iteration of the fellowship was undertaken by Mohawk artist Ange Loft. This was entitled Carrying Our Bones, and it looked into what it means to care for ancestral remains, while at the same time interrogating archaeology as a settler practice, but also one that produces evidence that can affirm the longstanding presence of Mohawk communities on the island itself. You can find more information about Ange's project on our website as well. So I'm really delighted to welcome you to this event that is part of our Indigenous-led Design Fellowship Program, but also, as you saw from the posters in and around the CCA, is part of our general CCA summer research events. This past Thursday, we had one of our research fellows, who is right there, in fact, Megan Wisner, presenting on her research project that looked at the history of mass timber industry in Canada and elsewhere. Good timing, Meg. And today, I'm really, really pleased to welcome the three fellows within our Indigenous-led Design Fellowship Program. We have Amina Lalor, Ivana Molina Apaza, who's here, and Tin Ayala. And I'll introduce them all in much more detail in a minute. But I want to say a few words on the program. So the program dates back to 2022. And thus far, we have hosted 2 previous cohorts of researchers within the program. What the program tries to do is really expand definitions of design. And so really not to limit this to the kind of paths of professionalization that we know very well, architect, landscape architect, urban planner, but really try to probe what it means for Indigenous communities to produce their own forms of design. So this could be around caring for agricultural spaces, thinking about community gathering, and really trying to expand the kind of inclusivity and conversations that can take place here around practices of design and architecture. Also, the architecture of the program has a kind of unique aspect where their primary research takes place elsewhere. I'll say something about how it engages with the CCA collection, but over the course of 4 months, they use the funds associated with the fellowship to undertake a community-based project, by and large. And they do this over the course of 4 months, and then during the residency period here at the CCA, in this case, Amina, Ivana, and Tin are here for a 2-week period. They bring the project and enter into this broader kind of institutional conversation, and most particularly actually with our collection team, because the ambition, one of the other ambitions of the program is that over the course of the thus far 3 years of the program, with these 6 different research projects, they initiate this broader dialogue amongst a group of 6 about potentially donating the materials associated with their research projects to the CCA and have them enter the collection. So this, in the background, and partly in their time here, it's initiating dialogue with our archivists, catalogers, Martine de Vletter, Associate Director of the collection, and really understanding what it means for the CCA to hold Indigenous authored materials within its collection. So this is a really important part of their time here. The two previous cohorts of fellows, just to give you a sense, in 23-24, we welcome Naomi Ratty, an Anishinaabe landscape architect, and Jason Sirkin, a Métis architect from northern Saskatchewan. And last year we had Lorraine Wolf, who's a Tahltan architect based in Vancouver, and Sean Bailey, who's a Métis architect and educator based in a way between northwestern Ontario and Winnipeg. And this fall, we will have a conversation amongst the 6 fellows to really initiate this dialogue around holding their research materials in the CCA collection. So today, you can kind of keep that in mind in a way when we're engaging with Amina, Ivana, and Tin's projects. Think about how, what kind of archive do they constitute? What does it mean for an Indigenous archive to exist within a settler institution? I think this raises questions around language, access, intimacy, and as I think we'll discuss today, notions of reciprocity. So I'd like to now briefly introduce the fellows and their projects. As I said, they're in residence at the CCA for 2 weeks. Many of the people joining here today are other CCA research fellows here to support their work, so they're familiar to them. But for the others joining, I'll introduce them just in a bit of depth so you get a sense of who they are and what they do. So Amina, who's here, is an assistant professor at Laurentian University MacEwan School of Architecture in Nasquakamok, or Sudbury. Raised in Takaranto, Toronto, she is mixed Vietnamese, Irish, and Red River Métis. Amina is involved in 2 ongoing research projects connected to the University of Guelph. One is Nokum's House, a community engaged in land-based research lab, and Where the Rivers Meet, decolonizing place narratives in the city. This is a project that strives to challenge the settler colonial erasure of Indigenous presence in Guelph. Her continued research explores the meaning of practicing architecture in a good way on Indigenous lands within a violently imposed settler colonial context. And her project, within the context of the Indigenous-led design fellowship program, seeks to build what she calls a decolonial atlas that engages with nations in and around Nasquakamok, Sudbury, a place that can hold their stories, expectations, and forms of dialogue when it comes to how Amina's own studio teaching at Laurentian can indeed pursue architectural education in a good way. Ivana Molina Apaza, who's here, as I mentioned, is a sociologist and researcher based in Alto, Bolivia. Her work explores the tensions between popular and academic cultures, focusing on the differences between oral and written traditions, as well as between collectively created cultural expressions and those attributed to individual authors. She's received national recognition, winning the Nuestra Historia desde Mirades Jóvenes and Mujeres en Nuestra Historia essay contests. Tin, who's one of her collaborators, grew up in territory currently occupied by Ecuador and examines Andean post-colonial responses based on the Cholo. This is a word of Indigenous origin used during the colonial period to categorize descendants of Indigenous and Spanish people. So Cholo as a border identity capable of re-signifying colonial notions of race. Their work employs abigaramiento as a methodology to create tools for celebrations, transforming colonial lamentation into acts of cultural empowerment. A fundamental aspect of their practice involves direct actions in collaboration with Alto Aesthetics, a transdisciplinary collective based in El Alto. And I'll briefly introduce the collective. They're a multidisciplinary group based in El Alto, and the collective creates spaces for the visual, social, and economic analysis of the aesthetics developed in the region. They were founded in 2022, and the collective functions as a platform to organize debates, fanzines, parties, and exhibitions, fostering critical thinking of Andean culture. There are 17 members from diverse disciplines, and the collective bridges academia, activism, and artistic practice, cultivating collaboration and propositions that resonate with the local context. Members include Alexis Arguello, Arbol Ruiz, Cristal Rojas, Fer Masi, Gabriel Condori, Ivana, Luis Michelio, Maria Fernanda Cáceres, Mario Coraite, Noemi Gonzalez, Pamela Vizcara, Pedro Aliaga, Samuel Hilari, Santos Miranda, Tin, and Wendy Hilari. And their research project that Tin and Ivana will share more about is rooted in the Feria 16 de Julio in El Alto and Aymara, Quechua, and Cholo Urban Center. And it revolves around their efforts to ground indigenous languages, customs, and architectural forms in a reciprocal economy that can affirm indigenous continuity in El Alto while also furthering the actions and interventions made by the collective. So Ivana in particular will speak in Spanish, and Tin will translate, and we'll, happy to take questions in Spanish if you have them. And I thought, after that fairly long introduction, but I think important to give you the full context of the program and their projects, I think we can begin. So please, join me in welcoming Amina, Tin, and Ivana.
Dawn arrives like an icy blade over the Altiplano. The wind cuts through, lifting the dust from the empty avenue. Dragging plastic bags discarded last week, twisting old posters of candidates without legitimacy. At 4,000 meters above the sea level in El Alto, Bolivia, the sun is a dagger, blinding before it warms. The first vendor lays out her aguayo, a minimal square meter territory of market stretched over the open ground. With movements steeped in memory, she unfolds the blue plastic sheet, pulls out bags filled with coca leaves, and arranges them with the care due to a plant that has withstood conquest and racism. Then another woman sits beside her, then another, and so, with no other call than the light warming the hill. The Hachacatu begins to take shape, one of the largest markets in South America, a vast trading ground that no one can ever see in its entirety, because it never stops shifting, because it never stops piling up, winding its own labyrinths. By the time the sun rises fully, the market is a human river. Women in polleras with children tied to their backs, young men in smuggled sneakers, uncle with eyes accustomed to the logic of the disorder. In its narrow and wide streets alike, stalls overflow with Chinese toys, Taiwanese radios, Brazilian underwear, cell phones recycled just the day before, medicinal herbs brought from Sorata, avocados from Cochabamba, evangelical Bibles printed in Colombia. The market is a fragmented map of the world, a geography of objects without passports. The chihuinas and makeshift stalls turn walking here into a journey across a mountain range of merchandise. There are piles of second-hand clothes, bundled up and shipped from the United States and Europe. Garments discarded by a gringo and reborn here with a new owner. There are car parts still dripping with oil, brought from clandestine workshops where stolen vehicles from across the border are dismantled. In the Feria 16 de Julio, its official title, different territories and timelines are chewed together in a single bite. Objects never meant to meet, born in opposite geographies, designed for different purposes, coexist. Carefully selected coca leaves from the yungas are sold just meters away from the plastic Chinese toys with Mandarin labels. The ancestral and the globalized, the handmade and industrial do not cancel each other. They absorb each other, they empower each other, they transfigure one another. The market is an abigarrado landscape, a cheje fabric where the indigenous and the global do not ask permission to overlap. Here, the popular economy is a defiant cry against the formal structures of banks, contracts, and exclusionary systems. El Alto's thriving economy is not an accident. It is upheld by thousands of migrant bodies and the children of the rural migrants who turned this highland into a city. Mostly urban Aymaras, people whom the white elites have chosen to call cholos. But the cholo is not a defeat, it's not an insult anymore. It is the embodiment of a modernity that the state never wanted to imagine. One that does not erase its indigenous roots, that refuses to be domesticated by whiteness, that inhabits the urban without abandoning the rural. As Peruvian sociologist Aníbal Quijano says, here, the costume of the original community and their codes of the modern city are lived simultaneously. There is contradiction. There is survival. There is strategy.
Another 30 minutes, maybe 40, until sunset. I start to ascend the rocky outcrop through the forest. It's getting dim now, under the dense canopy of mostly red pines, white pines, and paper birch. I encounter a concentration of birdsong, and I pause for a moment to listen. I retrieve my phone and open Merlin. She tells me I'm hearing a veery, a yellow-rumped warbler, an American redstart, and a common loon in the distance. The loon's call, I know well. The others, I can't see them now. I don't know what they look like, but I'll look them up when I return home. I've been ill with a virus, and I feel the weakness in my body. I've got a Ricola on hand to soothe the soreness in my throat, and also repress the urge to cough. A rather unpleasant song to offer the birds. I'm sweating, it's almost a cold sweat, and I wonder if this was a good idea. Mosquitoes buzz around me and are drawing blood. It's not much farther, I tell myself, another 10 minutes maybe. It's good to leave the house, move my body, get some fresh air. Though the air is laced with a haze from the many forest fires burning elsewhere, still good, I tell myself. I reach a viewpoint along the cliff. The black-stained rock below my feet, scarred with the tracks from what must have been a heavy machine, creating a scored trail, lines through the black-stained surface, created to provide grip for visitors like myself. I can't see the sun from where I am. The view is towards the east, but the sky is a lovely gradient of blues. I notice the crescent moon towards the west. Many meters below radiates a series of ripples in the small inlet. I notice something small and brown at the epicenter, a long white stick bobbing at its mouth, and silver leaves floating in clusters around them. A beaver, chewing away, unaware that I am watching from above. I continue in that direction, toward the little sparkle of sunlight through the dense trees. I finally descend towards the water's edge, where the view opens up towards the west. The sun is shrouded in cloud cover, but peaks of golden pink and orange bleed through. I've come to this spot before, and I notice the superstack extends above the line of trees in the distance. They're starting to dismantle it as we speak, no longer required to disperse the toxic sulfur dioxide produced by the mine. I'm startled by a sudden slap in the water out in the marshland. It's a beaver, sending a warning. There's an uninvited visitor here. It communicates to other beavers. I stand still, looking over the wetland, gently reflecting the broken light through the clouds above. A lovely magenta flower is in bloom all along the water's edge. There are small trails that part through the brush, likely carved by the beavers. There are unripe blueberries near my feet. I see movement next to what looks like a lodge. The beaver swims out parallel to the shoreline and makes a loop. Maybe they are on patrol, trying to detect my movements, trying to determine if I am a threat. They swim the same path out closer to the shore, then back towards the lodge 3 times while I watch. Illuminated by the setting sun, I see the silhouette of the beaver swimming back and forth. I stand still, not wanting to cause further alarm. Treading gently on a trail of pine needles, I leave the water's edge and make my way back to the trail before the light is lost. My name is Amina Lalor. I'm mixed Vietnamese, Irish, and Red River Métis. My paternal grandparents grew up in Manitoba, and my Métis family names are St. Mars, Harkness, and Stevenson. My maternal family came to Canada as refugees from Vietnam in the early 1980s. I was born and raised in a suburb just north of Toronto, which is Treaty 13 territory. And I've also spent a good portion of my adult life in Cambridge, Kitchener-Waterloo, and Guelph, on the Haldimand Tract and within the Grand River watershed, on Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral Territory. 2 years ago, I moved to Swagamok, or Sudbury, Ontario, to start an assistant professor position at Laurentian University's MacEwan School of Architecture. In Sagamok, we are located on the territory of the Tikmikshing, Anishinaabe, and Wanapitei First Nations. Sudbury is also held by the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. The Anishinaabe-Moan word Swagmok translates to where the three roads meet. While my time over the last 2 years has been mostly occupied by my work, I've found some time to get out to local trails and lakes like the one I described. Slowly, I'm getting to know this place, spending time on the land, and also learning local histories. In September 2024, while teaching a master's studio, I asked my students to reflect on what they knew about Sudbury, its story, its history. These were students that, for the most part, had studied at the MacEwan School of Architecture at Laurentian University in Sudbury for the past 4 years. For general context, Sudbury is a mid-sized city with a population of approximately 167,000 people. It's in northern Ontario, and it's also the largest city in Ontario by land area. Most students knew about the meteorite believed to have impacted the region approximately 1.85 billion years ago. And they knew about the railways and mining and forestry industries, the environmental destruction that ensued, the Inco, now owned by Vale, superstack, built to disperse the sulfur dioxide emissions more broadly across the region. They knew about the stained rock from the acid rain and pollution in Sudbury. They also knew of monuments like the Big Nickel. They knew of the local First Nations whose territory we occupied, the Anishinaabe and Tikmikshing and Wanapitei First Nations. They learned about practices connected to birch bark canoes as well as wigwams throughout their education. But ultimately, there was still a lot we didn't know collectively about the deeper histories and relationships with the land, especially when it came to local Anishinaabe cultures and treaty relationships. Could we dig deeper? As a mixed Indigenous settler and refugee person, over the past 10 years of my academic and professional life, I've focused on exploring what it means to practice architecture and design in a good way here on Indigenous lands that make up Turtle Island, also known as North America. This work primarily started in my master's thesis, and the core questions I was asking included, how do we as architects reconcile our practice within a settler colonial context, violently inscribed onto Indigenous lands? How do we confront our complicity in Indigenous erasure and honor the treaties and kinship networks that underlie our presence on this ground? Amid an escalating climate crisis and acknowledging architecture as a land-based practice, how do we mend our relationships with the land, water, plants, and animals? Coming to Sudbury as a mixed urban Indigenous person, I've reflected on my responsibility as a teacher on lands that are not my own and that I do not yet have an established relationship with. The work that is part of this fellowship is an effort to honor a responsibility to reciprocity with local First Nations and the land.
As the Alto Aesthetics collective, we seek to create a space for the analysis of the design emerging in the city of El Alto. We read the 16 de Julio market as more just than a trading ground. Yes, it is an economic engine, but also a cultural epicenter, a laboratory where the futures of the Andean city are being designed. In this context, we understand design as a survival tactic, a way of negotiating culture in a system that has systematically stigmatized our identities. This year, as part of the Indigenous-led Design Fellowship Program, we test our understanding of design by opening a collective stall in the market. This is not a nostalgic or folkloric gesture. It is an action that challenges the colonial narrative that has imposed an imaginary of marginality upon us. For 2 months, our stall will be a place for experimentation. We will propose redesigns of local cultural products, such as polleras, giving the possibility to kids to project their traditional clothing of Aymara women in the future. CDs music mixes, creating a conversation around racism and marginalization of chicha, an Andean musical genre. A popular architecture agency where the market passers co-design their own house with vernacular symbols. This is some of the actions that we did during the month of March and April in the feria. We seek to investigate the agency of these local businesses and expand their possibilities within the city. Our aim is to redefine the legitimacy of cultural production by rooting it into a context of popular economies. Those who have developed their own modes of production and distribution beyond the official recognition. We also seek to explore ways to sustain our work as a collective without relying solely on cultural institutions and grant funding. We aim to design economic models that support self-managed creative initiatives, models that learn from the market and its ability to constantly reinvent itself. This is the experiment that we did in El Alto.
For me, the work connected to this fellowship is very much still in process. The main piece I want to share with you today is actually a series of describing the methods that I've engaged so far and what is still to come. So one grounding concept in terms of the methodology for this work is a term called Biska Biang, which is an Anishinaabe word that means to return to oneself. From a kind of indigenous methodologies perspective and worldview, nothing is objective. We are always filtering, our understandings through our own lens. And as we practice as architects, as designers, the need to understand ourselves as a context that we are working within has been an important part of my practice throughout. So looking at this term called Biska Biang, and again it means to return to oneself, it's important. The term was developed for Indigenous students and scholars to kind of unpack the ways in which settler colonialism has impacted them and their experience. And then by doing that, they're then able to engage in kind of research in a good way, understanding their own experience and perspectives. And so one of the things that I did as part of my master's thesis, and I do with my students now, is reflecting on our own relationship to land, on our own relationship to indigeneity, to settler colonization. This was, in effect, kind of my thesis work was ultimately this reflection, my master's thesis work. And with students, one of the first assignments I have students do in almost all of my classes is to actually spend time reflecting on their own relationship to land. So this could be their ancestral relationships, this could be, their kind of lived experience in connection with land. It could really be anything, but it's about reflecting on that relationship to land, especially in a time where we're often so disconnected. And so that's how the work starts. For this work of this kind of decolonial atlas that I'm proposing, this idea of gathering stories in connection to Swagmuk, one of the things that was important to do is to kind of do our homework as well, to not rely on local Indigenous folks to provide all the answers to kind of answer all our questions that we may be able to answer ourselves by reading works that have been published or reading, there are plenty of resources available, and I think this is something that comes up time and time again around questions of reconciliation, right? There's work for all of us to do, and again, I come at this from a perspective of I am Indigenous, I'm mixed Indigenous, but my ancestors are not from the lands that I'm currently living on, and so I'm not Indigenous to the place where I'm currently living and working. So, in the way that I talk about this, I think I'm also someone who needs to learn, who needs to do that homework in this place where I'm working. So, as part of this work, I've worked with students for a couple terms now in the 2 years that I've been at Laurentian, and last year I had students do this work of reflecting on their own relationship with land, and then the next step was to start to gather secondary resources through this lens of decolonization, through looking at stories that have been marginalized, stories that have potentially been erased, or there's been an attempt to erase those stories, and trying to kind of calibrate our search to place focus on those Indigenous stories, on also stories connected specifically to our other than human relations, so plants, animals, fungi, also thinking about the waters, the rocks. And that resulted in a series of, or I guess a collaborative map. I'll share some of these may be going around soon, but I'm going to hang on to these ones here. I do want to share a quote that is by Wildcat and others about decolonization in education. So, as they put it, if colonization is fundamentally about dispossessing Indigenous peoples from land, decolonization must involve forms of education that reconnect Indigenous peoples to land and the social relations, knowledges, and languages that arise from the land. So the way I look at it is about establishing that relationship with the land more closely, and this is true for students as well. So after I get the students to reflect on their own positionality and their own relationship to land, that next step is to engage directly with the land itself. And I talked about this earlier this week to some folks, but I assigned this project called a land journal. And we're very used to the practice of sketching in architecture, where it's something we do constantly. And so to use that same tool of observation and sketching and apply it to getting to know our more than human relations is what the kind of intention of this project is. So the students have to select a site, a place on the land with living beings in Swagmuck, and they spend the whole term visiting that site, once a week at least. And they start to draw, take notes, observe what they see. Part of that work involves identifying what they're seeing in English and Anishinaabe-Moan if they're able to find resources on that, and also understand the interconnections between living beings. So observing what insects may be inhabiting or occupying or living on certain plants, what animals are eating, what they're leaving behind in terms of scat or traces of feeding. And so those are the prompts that the students are invited to engage with. And so they're building a very direct relationship with a specific place over time as the seasons change and through the cycles of this place. It sometimes forces them to go outside in the snow or the rain. I think consistently students have expressed that it is a really meaningful experience for them, and they usually end up observing animals or plants that they'd never known about before. There's some images that are being passed around of some of that work. The next stage in this work was starting to gather information around secondary resources. So we did a collaborative mapping project using Google My Maps because it's very accessible. All the students can work on it together. They started to look at place names, so gathering Anishinaabe place names. They were also looking at the impacts of mining, the boundaries of treaties. Again, we're in the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. Even looking at things like data around roadkill and where moose were intersecting with highways, deer, coyotes, wolves, looking at this kind of tension between this, kind of very extractive colonial city and the ecology that surrounds it. So again, I think this idea of decolonial or kind of looking at things with an Indigenous lens is much broader than just looking at Indigenous histories. It's about approaching a kind of deeper site analysis with the lens of an Indigenous worldview, and so much of that is around relationality and the kind of interconnection of all our relations. The final piece, or the final kind of project that the students had worked on so far, was synthesizing a kind of creative work based on the research they had done and some of the ideas they'd been mulling over, and you'll see some images of some of that work. There was one student who mapped out, who kind of juxtaposed images of all the different animals that were living in an urban setting with the city grid, and traced out the image of a thunderbird with guidance from someone from our local community, from local Atikomikshin community there, also a student at the school. And they advised that the thunderbird ultimately oversees all of the animals. And so the image of the thunderbird was overlaid over a map of Sudbury, and then again, the kind of intertwining of all the different animals that lived in that environment alongside humans. Another piece looked at the insects that live locally, and they put care into representing that work with beating the insects themselves and kind of representing them with a lot of love, a kind of loving portrait of various insects that are local to Swagmak. Another project looked at mapping out, again, Indigenous place names using materials from the place, and not just a kind of two-dimensional depiction. I could go on and on. There was a project about blueberries and the ways in which we pick blueberries. Blueberries grow in Sudbury because of the acidic soils that ultimately were the result of the extraction and pollution in the area, but the blueberries thrive. There's this was our kind of homework, right? Our homework to kind of get to know this place as best we can through, again, firsthand engagement, through reading secondary resources. The work that I hope to continue to do, I've had plenty of informal conversations with community members locally. There are many more that I need to do. So this project is very much in process. It's still taking shape. It's not at all complete. Everything, all of the work that kind of continues will be in collaboration with the Atikomikshin community as well as the Wanapitei community, and also just Indigenous folks who are part of the university community who may not necessarily be from the local First Nations, but they've been working in the community and have a relationship with that place. So it's ongoing, it's imperfect, I'm learning, and I'm inviting students to learn with me. As part of the discussion today, we really want to invite dialogue around reciprocity and what that means in everyone's kind of unique contexts. So I will open up a kind of discussion around reciprocity, maybe with a kind of broad question to start. And you can feel free to kind of bounce off of what we've shared, and bring in new ideas around what we've shared. But what does reciprocity look like for you in your work, in your context? What does it look like?
I'm visual artist, and a teacher. And so for me, reciprocity is in my practice because I share what I've acquired over years, but it's always like an exchange. I'm never emptying myself onto either my students or my studio mates. There's always filling up again with what I learned from them. And it's my practice even though I'm a sculptor, I see it as an act of reciprocity. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the question and for your words so far. I'm currently doing my PhD in Australia, specifically in Sydney, and the thesis is about the spatialities of Indigenous protest in the Australian context. And it emerged out of my own work as an organiser within the social movement for Indigenous justice, and in conversation with Indigenous protest organisers, which means I'm also interviewing them as part of the thesis process. When I first began doing the project, I was, I guess it was a point of anxiety, being a non-Indigenous person writing about these histories. But once I began, talking to people about it, it became very clear that they were very excited about the idea of there being a collection of their experiences and their histories in one document. So I guess that's where the idea of reciprocity comes out in my own work.
I'm thinking a lot about something that you said about, it's not what you said, but it's making me think that reciprocity is an imperfect process. You were talking about this with your students and with being on a land on which, this type of striving for reciprocity, and any idea that reciprocity could ever be achieved or perfect, I think, and I'm just echoing things I'm hearing you say, I think I really appreciate this idea of an ongoing process that doesn't become resolved, but that is constantly needs to be worked towards because of the conditions of reciprocity are always changing, and the conditions of either occupation or colonization are always ongoing. You and I were having a conversation a couple of days ago about co-option and capitalism, and so thinking about how reciprocity can never be achieved in a kind of way, in a perfect way, and it varies so much also depending on, is it institutional reciprocity or personal reciprocity or reciprocity as a teacher, which you've spoken about, or reciprocity as an architect, that depending on what hat you're wearing also reciprocity changes. Because your relationship or my relationship to power is so different in those different contexts. But I really kind of hear what you were talking about in this kind of ongoing work and appreciate that kind of process-driven idea behind it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can bounce off that a little bit and also kind of reflect on the ways that this engages with Ivana and Tin's work. I think this question of power is really important in this discussion as well, and also the kind of ways we can use reciprocity, or again, a striving for reciprocity as a disruption of systems too, as a kind of challenging, because these are not always the dynamics present in institutions, and I guess I should, I think I forgot to mention that a major way, and maybe it's obvious, but a major way in which an architecture school like the MacEwan School of Architecture has engaged with community is doing work with community, right? Doing architectural projects with community, and that work's been successful over the years. And I should also acknowledge that there's, even though the MacEwan School of Architecture is a new school, there is a long lineage already of this kind of reciprocity that's been established by those that have come before me. But I think this work for me is very much, how do I fit into this work, and how do I do it honoring the kind of work I've done to this point? But maybe I'll kind of bounce this back towards Tin and Ivana too, around, I think we've had so many discussions around the ways in which our projects differ, but also the kind of connections between them, and how how and Ivana, there's this kind of a material exchange, this kind of economic exchange that is very central to that reciprocity. And so maybe I'll pass it on to you to speak more to that in reflection, also with the kind of comments of reciprocity we've had so far.
Yeah, I think that in a way, for us, reciprocity is not exchange of exact value. It doesn't mean that we are exchanging with certain exact capitalist rules. As DDS says, it's an ongoing process, and we'd like to think it like that. And for that, yeah, we would like to share with you an experience that we had in the market for the opening of our stall, that it's strategy that we do in the Andes that allows to understand what is reciprocity for us. So I'm going to tell you. We woke up at 6 in the morning in La Altusa. It is Sunday, March 2nd, 2025. We prepared the metal structure, the boxes of beer, and the speakers. We loaded everything into a taxi and headed to Plaza Vallevian. Most of the stalls were already set up. Vendors hurried by carrying bundles, with others were already calling over their offers. With a small cart, we crossed the Panoramica Avenue and set up our little stand in front of the greenhouse. We dressed it up for the occasion, hanging streamers and colorful balloons on the sides. From noon, brass bands flooded the space with a clamor of cymbals, trumpets, and drums. To the rhythm of the music, with a megaphone and the support of the pasantes, our chuta troupe wore a sky blue costume adorned with birds and multicolored flowers. Accompanied by a silver pepino, they made a parade through the streets, joining the collective stomp of the carnival. When they reached out 2 square meters tall, the Collatron, the collective sound system, that you can also see it in the pictures, resonated with its geometrical forms, a superposition of Tiwanacotan architecture and electronic patterns. The speaker amplified a mix by DJ Achachi and DJ Chiara, a selection of chicha that makes the feria dance. This is how we begin the chaya. In the 4 corners of our stall, we scatter flowers, fava beans, and golden corn kernels. We pour beer, letting it spill and soak into the earth, the wood, the tarp. May I remember how in our collective potato chakra, a small piece of land that we have next to Titicaca Lake, we chayat the crops, offering beer, coca leaves, and the best potatoes to the land in hopes of good harvest. We weren't just expressing gratitude, we were recognizing the land's agency. So this is an agricultural practice of offering food to the land in order to receive prosperity. Likewise, we chaya our stall. We treat it as an entity with will and destiny, trusting that it will return our gesture with good fortune. Through its invisible lines, the chaya traces a way of relating to what surrounds us, a design strategy that understands that everything we bring into the world also transforms us. What we create affects us, shaping our practices and ways of inhabiting. As the Colombian anthropologist Arturo Escobar says, design designs us. So that's the chaya. And in a way, it's interesting how reciprocity is embedded on the Andean philosophy, and it comes from the agricultural background, but it's also applied to objects of modernity and globalization, as cars, buildings, and market stalls. So that's what we did with our market stall. And now, in the same way we did our chaya, I would like to let the microphone to Ivana to start our small experiment with you.
Bueno, buenas tardes. De la misma forma que nosotros ofrecimos a nuestro puesto objetos de valor para su buen funcionamiento y prosperidad económica,
So in the same way, we gave to our stall valuable objects to its good functioning and prosperity, economical prosperity.
pues quisiéramos invitarles a ustedes también a dar una ofrenda para el funcionamiento de nuestro puesto.
So we would like you to invite you to also give an offering or an object for the good functioning of our stall.
Puede ser algo que vendamos en la feria, una idea para su desarrollo o un aporte económico. Algo que tengan con ustedes, algo que podamos pasar tal vez al centro, ¿no? A esta mesa al centro.
So we would like to invite you to right now, with the means that you have, to have a physical object. If you have, it's okay. But we would like to make this experiment to give an offering to our stall. So that means that it can be something that we can sell in the feria back in Bolivia's El Alto market. So with this action, we would like to bring the material that we brought here. It's something that comes from El Alto. This knowledge that we're bringing, this story that we're sharing with you is something that we're bringing. But also we want to bring something back to the feria. That's why we will like to have something to put inside the table. It can be something that you have with you right now. It can be also an idea for the development of our stall, or it can be like also money if you have money. And you can pass the objects in the spiral, and Ivana will put them into the table. We're really going to sell this in Feria 16 de Julio market. Okay, and now as part of this exchange, as part of this, the fact that we're coming here to present our project, and also we would like to give you symbolic object that represent our projects with Amina and with the collective Alto Aesthetics. We would like to offer you a print of the poster that we hanged for the 16 de Julio stall. We can pass it also from the center to the outside. This is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, it's fairly simple. It's a spot that I like to go to called Moonlight Beach. It's on Lake Ramsey. So the name for the lake in Anishinaabe is Bitimagamising, which means water beside the hill. That's the Anishinaabe name for Lake Ramsey Lake or Lake Ramsey. If you've ever been to Sudbury, that's the kind of main lake right next to Bell Park, next to the Science Center, Science North, designed by Raymond Moriyama. And so it's a very significant lake in Sudbury. And this is a spot, this spot called Moonlight Beach is a spot where a lot of folks go to watch the sunset because it's got a view to the west. And in the image, you'll see that Inco super stack. I forget the exact timing, but it was the tallest freestanding structure. I think this juxtaposition of this significant industrial, landmark in Sudbury, kind of in contrast or perhaps in harmony, I'm not sure, maybe not, but with the kind of water and landscape that Sudbury is also known for. That's all.
El mundo en la era del capitalismo en este tiempo, 2025, tal vez se explica con esta frase del siglo XX, que es el dinero hace girar el mundo.
So, in our current time of capitalism, we can understand the world, or we can understand what's around us with a sentence that represents this era. It's money makes the world go round.
Pero nuestro mundo andino tiene un sentido diferente y aún en medio del sistema económico capitalista, lo que le da sentido a nuestra realidad es la reciprocidad.
But in our Andean world, we are interpreting this sentence in a different way. Even if we are part of the capitalist economic system, what gives sense to our reality is reciprocity.
La reciprocidad hace girar nuestro mundo andino.
Reciprocity makes the world go round, our world or Andean world.
Entendemos que el CCA es una institución, un centro que trabaja bajo lógicas de la especialización en el trabajo y en el desarrollo de un tipo específico de conocimiento.
We understand the CCA as an institution, a center that works under the logics of the specialization of work and the development of a specific type of knowledge.
Pero de forma esencial, el CCA son un conjunto de personas. Al igual que consideramos nuestro puesto una entidad con agencia, esta institución, el CCA, también es una entidad.
But in its essential form, CCA is just group of persons. In the same way, we consider our stall in the market as an entity with agency. We think that institution is also an entity with agency.
Nosotros, en nombre de nuestro colectivo de 17 personas que trabajan en el Alto, estamos aquí mirando el CCA como una entidad a la que traemos una ofrenda de reciprocidad.
In the name of our collective of 17 people, we look at CCA as an entity that we are bringing an offering of reciprocity. So, in a sense, we would like to extend this action of reciprocity not only in the experiment that we did for us, but also in a larger scale. This collaboration that we started with CCA, it's sometimes systematically seen as one-time collaboration. But we think that because we are persons, we are people that still talk, create debate, create dialogue, we would like to continue working with CCA. We would like to continue creating this dialogue. And for that, what we bring with Ivana today, it's essential, in its essential form, is an offering that we would like to make, a reciprocity offering. In the same way we are doing an offering to our stall or to the land to give us prosperity, we are offering the CCA an offering to continue the dialogue. We think that offerings are part of the Andean history, and it's a pre-colonial practice that was adapted to the modern world through colonialism and that we still practice. So we are contextualizing our offering inside the CCA institutional frame, and our offering is composed by, in the first place, when we sold in the market in Bolivia, we gained Bolivianos. So this is the money that people gave us during the selling of the stall, of the products in the stall. We brought it here, the entirety of the money. Ivana brought it from El Alto, and part of the offering for us is to take part of that money that I have here to the CCA. So I'm going to give this money, pass around, and you put it to give it to Ivana. The second element of the offering is this continent that was named America during the conquest. It's a territory that is complex because it seems to be fragmented. It is coded in a systematical way by its colonial impositions as racism, as structural differences, and by the system that exploits, that system of economical exploitation that divides the global north and the global south. For us, coming here to this place, to Canada, to the CCA, it's a very important act because we are crossing a border, and borders are a materialization of the colony because we are separating people from its origins. And this is the starting point of colonization. So for us to come here, it's a very important political act, and we think that our presence here is political. So that's why we are giving this map to say that we are the same piece of land, even though in our conceptualization we understand that there's very different, we have a separation between global north and global south. So we're giving this one, and it's a map made with sugar, as the sugar and the mysteries that are given to the Pachamama in the Andes, with the intention to create and to reinforce the links and bundles between Montreal and El Alto Aesthetics and the CCA. And the last part of offering is this miniature of a dream that we have with Alto Aesthetics, that it's the book that we're making with Alto Aesthetics about the project that we made in La Feria 16 de Julio. Traditionally, in the Andes, the knowledge and the way it's shared is through orality. That means that history is not written. History is shared through our words. But in the same way that in the Andes we have used the market as a tool to negotiate our presence in capitalism and globalization, we want to create this book as a way to use language also as a tool to have a discourse inside the written knowledge. The book is a way to generate an archive and our presence of the Feria 16 de Julio, and at the same time is our proposition to generate collaboration or future collaboration with the CCA and create this dialogue. We didn't come here to give our sacred objects in a passive form. We come here with the will to work in a a reciprocity level, in a horizontal level. We don't want other people to write about our history as an additional chapter, that it's subordinated to the universal history, that is linear and Western-centered. We are in condition to write and to generate reflections from our own reality, and that's what we want to do in the book. And this book is also a materialization of cultural object done in Bolivia, that it's an alacitas. Alacitas is these miniatures done in the beginning of the year in order to project the future, or the wheels in the future. So there's miniatures of cars, houses, visas, diplomats, etc. So this is a miniature of the book. Under a philosophy of reciprocity, this is what we want to share with you today, with the CCA and with all of you. And with these elements, we are going to compose our offering.
I'm going to offer a quick reflection, or almost an opening into this dialogue between, especially in reflection of the kind of the piece of land crafted from sugar. I can't really speak to this, but I just wanted to open up something maybe perhaps for others to look into more, and perhaps for Tin and Ivana and I to look into more. But I have heard from knowledge holders before about a prophecy around the eagle and the condor, which connects indigenous peoples in kind of North America and South America. And so I won't speak more to this. I don't know if others have heard of this, but just kind of an opening into this conversation around the kind of connection between nations across these lands and across our cultures.
Yeah, totally. There's like a lot of representations of eagles and condors together to unite exactly the two parts of the supposed two parts of the territory. It's very powerful. Yeah, I think it's a symbol of unity, and to remember that we are part of the same piece of land. This is coca leaves that Ivana brought from the Andes. Traditionally, something that is used and chewed before colonization, but a leaf that was also criminalized from colony. So it's something that we use also to create these mesas. These are real bills that we got from the feria, and these are stamped with the logo of the collective EAEA, Alto Aesthetics. And the bills are the first thing to put on the offering. Imagine now the not miniature book.
Bueno, esta es nuestra ofrenda para la entidad CCA. Y bueno, los sueños, ¿no? Con cada uno de los objetos simbólicos que Tina ha explicado.
This is our offering for the CCA entity, and these are the dreams that we just gathered and explained. Thank you.